Welcome to the Psychology of True Crime with me, RC. There's something about siblings, something unspoken. They grow up with the same parents, under the same roof, the same stories, and yet somehow they walk into adulthood carrying completely different emotional assignments. And in some families, those roles run so deep that even decades later, you could still feel the echo of who they were expected to be. Today, I want to talk about Charlie and Wendi Adelson, not in the sensational way that people often do, but through a psychological lens. Because what we see in their dynamic isn't just about two adults making choices, it's about siblings shaped by the same family system, but responding to it in very different ways. And not all siblings would show the kind of loyalty, the emotional covering, or even the detachment that we have witnessed publicly. So the question becomes, why these two? And I want you to remember, these are patterns, not accusations. These are frameworks we use in psychology to understand human behavior, especially behavior that confuses us. Every sibling relationship sits inside the emotional climate of the family. And when you listen to testimonies, interviews, or even just body language around this case, you could feel a family system where boundaries were loose, roles were fused, and emotional expectations were heavy. In psychology, we see this often in families where the parent, and it's usually just one parent, who's the central decision maker, the emotional generator, the person everyone else orbits around. And in this family, that appears to have been Donna. I'm not talking about blame or guilt. I'm talking about influence and emotional gravity. When a parent becomes the emotional center, the person who shapes the story, the loyalty, the fear, the rewards, the children adapt in predictable but powerful ways. It's important to note Alfred Adler, the father of birth order psychology, he teaches us something simple and profound. Children growing up in the same family are not growing up in the same experience. Think about your own siblings or other siblings that you've experienced. The firstborn, the middle child, the youngest. Each one forms their identity in response to the space that's already taken. So let's talk about Charlie and Wendy in this context. Charlie Adelson is technically the middle child, but psychologically, he functions like the eldest. And that's not accidental. It's the result of the emotional landscape he grew up in. In many families, where the true firstborn becomes emotionally distant or alienated, the next child in line is quietly promoted into the eldest role. In Adler's model, the older child often takes on a role of responsibility or rebellion. They're closer to the parent, they receive more pressure. They also learn very early on that closeness to the parent equals safety, approval, protection, and sometimes a sense of entitlement grows there too. The older child can learn my needs matter, I get rescued, and rules bend for me. I'm not diagnosing, I'm describing a pattern that shows up in families where the parental influence is strong and directive. We see this pattern here from testimony, documents, and years of communication. It's clear that Rob Adelson, the actual oldest, was emotionally pushed out long before this case became public. When a family alienates a child, it tells you something important. There is a preferred narrative, a required level of compliance, and an emotional contract the child is expected to sign. And truly, not every child signs it. In this family, Rob didn't. And the system responded the way controlling systems often do. They closed ranks without him. When the firstborn steps out, willingly or not, the next child is often absorbed into that space. That's what appears to have happened with Charlie. He becomes the son they relied on, the emotional extension of the dominant parent, the one expected to stay aligned, the one rewarded for loyalty. This is classic in families where parental influence is intense and directive. When an eldest role is given and not born into, the child often internalizes powerful beliefs such as I'm chosen, I'm protected, rules bend for me. This orientation surfaces during Charlie's testimony, including his statement that he was going to fund money with the expectation that his sister would later reimburse him had Dan accepted the $1 million relocation offer. Psychologically, this statement isn't just about financials. It reflects expectation of protection, reciprocity, and safety, which are all hallmarks of favored roles. Wendy, being the younger sibling, her emotional role as the younger sibling, especially as a daughter, daughters often grow up in a shadow that's already cast. They rarely compete directly. Instead, they adapt, they accommodate, they become flexible, agreeable, and sometimes emotionally compliant without even realizing it. For Wendy, the emotional tone she presents, the detachment, the intellectualization, the minimizing, those are all common adaptive traits for someone who learned early on to stay calm, stay agreeable, and out of conflict. We see an example of this when the prosecution asked whether her mother was controlling. Wendy instead described her mother as caring, supportive, and devoted. Clinically, this is not deception, it's adaptive minimization, a response common in high pressure family systems, not to manipulate, but to survive the emotional climate. And this is where the roles between siblings becomes it begins to diverge in ways people don't always understand. People often ask, why would a sibling protect another like this? Why would one sibling distance themselves emotionally while the other leans in? Why do siblings cover up for each other and others refuse? Because loyalty isn't just about love. In some families, loyalty is taught, it is conditioned, it is rewarded. And in families where a parent has strong influence, loyalty can become an unspoken contract, a currency, or a survival tool, if you will. And in these systems, protecting the sibling isn't about the sibling, it's about preserving the family identity that you were raised in. And not every sibling will follow this contract. Only the ones who are taught emotionally, not verbally, that their role depends on it. When one sibling is lifted and the other erased, the remaining siblings often survive by becoming emotionally careful. In this system, loyalty becomes like a currency. We also see this tension surface through indirect jabs, often delivered with humor, but it's not directed towards each other, but rather towards other people. For example, Charlie characterized Wendy's relationship dismissively during his trial. He says that, and I quote, Wendy dates nerds, and referred to her marriage to Dan as a mistake, unquote. Also, when he's asked if Donna favors Wendy, Charlie says, and I quote, she doesn't like my brother, but I'd like to think that it's a tie between Wendy and I, unquote. Wendy, in turn, during Donna's trial, says, and I quote, Charlie dates women who all seem to look alike, unquote. These moments matter psychologically. It shows that direct conflict is unsafe. It also shows us they're not taking jabs at each other, but rather other people who were involved with them without any regard to anyone's feelings. Sibling resentment usually comes out indirectly, not in direct confrontation. So we move on. In many older child roles, especially in enmeshed families, there's an externalized sense of morality, meaning the rules apply differently. Accountability becomes flexible. Consequences feel negotiable. Again, not diagnosing, just naming a pattern. that shows up in families where the eldest child learns early that love and approval are tied to boldness, risk taking, or emotional enmeshment with the parent. And since Charlie was the emotionally appointed eldest, he expected protection. He knew he will experience flexibility around consequences so long as he aligns closely with parental authority and externalizes accountability. Rob was the ghosted child, if you will, although not central to this case, but his absence is critical. Once a family demonstrates it could cut off a child, the remaining children learn one thing clearly, and that is don't be next. That creates a bond rooted less in love and more in fear of losing attachment. Wendy, on the other hand, often presents as emotionally removed. Her language tends to soften, intellectualize, or minimize conflict and responsibility. This is very common for younger siblings raised in high pressure systems. They learn to stay small, stay agreeable, keep the peace, and most importantly, not challenge the family story. Their emotional world becomes almost separate from the facts. It's not lying, it's adapting. This puts Wendy in the adaptive youngest position. She minimizes emotional rupture, intellectualizes stress, and she avoids confrontations. When you put these roles together, you see siblings performing their assigned positions, even as adults, one externalizing, one minimizing. It is important to say this plainly. Most siblings do not behave like this. Most siblings don't cover. Most siblings don't attach themselves to a parent's emotional agenda. Most siblings don't fuse identities. So, why does this happen here? Because sibling loyalty depends on the emotional power of the parent, the roles assigned in childhood, the reward system the family used, the sibling hierarchy, the survival strategies learned early on, and the fear of losing attachment. In many families, the bond is built on love. In others, the bond is built is keeping on family system intact. And that is very different psychologically. When you step back and look at Charlie and Wendy through this lens, not the headlines, not the public commentary, but the psychology of siblings raised in a certain family system, you begin to understand that their adult decisions didn't begin in adulthood. They began years before in roles that were shaped long before they ever knew the consequences. And when you view in this way, the goal isn't to judge, it's to understand how powerful family systems can be and how deeply they shape the children inside them. Not all siblings become disloyal. Not all siblings become detached. But in some families, the emotional contract written in childhood are the hardest ones to break. Thank you for watching The Psychology of True Crime. Let me know what stands out to you in their relationship as siblings, and I'll catch you on the next one.